Good day, this is Dan Duncan from CTK Community Technology, a company that offers online web-based software for United Ways and other funders and nonprofits to help drive your community impact work. And I'm the Vice President for Impact Strategies at CTK. And I joined CTK, for those that aren't aware, last year after more than 30 years as a United Way professional myself, most recently in Tucson, Arizona. And so this webinar that we're going to do today is really based on my 30 years of experience as a United Way professional, as well as a faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at Northwestern, and the work I've done across the country and the world in consulting around community impact. So again, just going to talk about some stories and some ideas that I have from my work to help us as United Ways drive our community impact a little more effectively, and certainly adding to that, utilizing technology as we move forward. So I'll be going through again some slides and some ideas as we go forward through the webinar, and also provide opportunities for questions or comments as we go forward. I think as I looked at the list, I think most of the folks that are on the webinar today are new and have not been on some of my other webinars. So for those that you've attended more than one, you may see a couple things that you've seen before. But since the majority of participants are new, we're going to focus on kind of some beginning concept as well as some more advanced ones as we go through. So again, I thank you all for joining us. And as we get started, the presentation objectives. What I'm going to talk about today is to drive your impact and results, how to identify the data and indicators required to drive your impact agenda, how to help your grantees collect data that is relevant to outcomes-based reporting, how to use data to drive your community impact agenda and show you actually an example of that, and then just some conversation about utilizing technology to enhance your outcomes reporting, certainly to get better results and to raise more resources. But before we get started, I'd like to get a little sense of who's around the table or on the webinar, so I'm going to do a couple polls real quick. So the first poll is, what is your metro size? Just so we can get a sense of what are the metro sizes here around the table. So I think almost everybody has voted, so let me close the poll and show you kind of the sense of the metro size. So it's actually pretty evenly split in the metro sizes. The second question is, where is your United Way? Where is your organization on the community impact journey? Just starting, in the murky middle, or on track but want to fine-tune your efforts? All right, so now I will show you that about 19% are just starting, the majority are in the murky middle, and about a third are on track but wanting to fine-tune your efforts. So that's great. So one of the things that really is important for me is setting some assumptions around achieving community impact. The first one is that effective organizations, whether they be funders or whether they're the agencies we fund, effective organizations need to be learning organizations that know how to effectively collect and use data to make the mid-course corrections necessary. So it's very clear that we need data today so that we can make changes, we can fine-tune as we react to the environment. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's so important in a few minutes. The second one is that it takes a wide variety of strategies and activities to achieve community change. And from my asset-based community development work, what it requires is both care and service. And what I mean by care is what people, citizens, residents, people involved in the community, the role they can play, family, neighbors, as well as the role of service, which is the agencies, the institutions, the programs and services. It requires both care and service. And I'll talk about it later at the end of this webinar, but I have another webinar on December 13th where I'm going to delve down specifically into the issue of care and service and how to create those kinds of strategies. So we won't talk about it a whole lot on this webinar today, but on December 13th will be another webinar specifically around that issue. Finally, we need to be able to measure the impact of everything we do at the community, strategy, and program level. So those are some assumptions that really help us drive our community impact agenda. Part of the reason this is so important is a couple things. I want to just set the stage again. Some of you may have seen this before, but for those that haven't, Elizabeth Shore, who actually helped United Way of America, United Way Worldwide launch some of the community impact work, talks about 5 lessons about what has to happen if we're going to have effective community impact strategies. The first thing is we have to be clear about the purposes of our work, the outcomes we are trying to achieve. So that's why it's so important to set outcomes, to set goals, to have community-wide goals that I'll talk about a little later. The second one is to be willing to be held accountable to these goals, so that it is really important that we are held accountable and that we have the data so we can be accountable. The third one is that we need to create and sustain the partnerships to achieve these purposes. No one institution, no one organization can do it alone. It takes partnerships. So we've got to be very clear about that as we move forward. So how do we create partnerships with the agencies we fund, with neighborhoods, with community to make the changes we need? The fourth is that we need to move audaciously into the world beyond programs. This is where Elizabeth Shore is really reinforcing the idea of both care and service as we move forward. So we need to look at how do we engage the community in this work as well as fund agencies and programs. And finally, we have to have the capacity to take community-wide responsibility to assure that the actions will lead to improved lives actually happen. And I think that's why it's really important and a great opportunity for United Ways to play this role in their local community, being willing to set that community-wide responsibility as we move forward. The second comment I want to make is about a book that really has been very helpful for me called Getting to Maybe: How the World Has Changed. It was a book that came out a couple of years ago, which I really recommend. Again, Getting to Maybe: How the World Has Changed, because they talk about how real world change occurs and give examples of that. But one of the things they also talk about is that there are 3 kinds of problems: simple, complicated, and complex. A simple problem is like baking a cake. Fairly simple recipe, simple ingredients, you put it together and you are assured of a good cake. A complicated problem is like sending a rocket to the moon. But it is very similar to a simple problem in that it's just much larger recipes, a lot more ingredients. But if you put that all together, because of physics, you will get to the moon because all variables always act the same. The third level of problems are complex. And this is the world we revolve in, of complex problems like raising a child, like helping a family become financially stable, whatever that may be. And with complex problems, the problem is the variables do not always act the same and the environment changes. So it doesn't work well to have one model that fits everyone. We need to have the data and timely information so we can make those mid-course corrections to respond to changes in complex problems. Because not everyone will come into our program and come out the same way because of the variables. So that's why data and mid-course corrections are so important. So the first part is identifying the data and indicators required to drive your impact agenda. And part of the issue, from my perspective, is that we spend a lot of time being confused between our volunteers, the agencies we fund, and United Way staff because we don't take the time to make sure that we're all on the same page relative to definitions. Whether that's outcomes reporting, outcomes indicators, targets. So one of the things I recommend is really take the time to make sure that you're coming up with common definitions that everyone agrees to as you begin to move forward. So I'm going to just offer some definitions that have been helpful for me and the work I've done at United Ways moving forward. Again, you can change these definitions a bit, but the key is just making sure that you take the time to make sure everybody agrees to the definitions of these things. So the first one is outcome tracking. What is that? Outcome tracking provides us the information necessary to define program project success, understand the components and process of success, prove program project strategy success, make informed decisions about future programming and resource allocation, and it also gives us the ability to qualify for more and larger grants and donations. So part of this is being very clear that this is why we need to do outcomes tracking and why we need to focus on it. The second definition is the community-wide impact statement or goal. Many funders, most funders, United Ways are certainly one of these, have developed a community-wide long-term goal that is setting our North Star for our action. For example, goals for the common good, the United Way of America, or now it's United Way Worldwide, challenge around education, income, and health. The United Way Worldwide set these goals. Most United Ways have adopted these or similar ones because it is important that as a funder we set our goals. Today's funders, for the most part, can't be all things for all people. We do know that we get better results when we focus, so it is important that you focus very specifically on some key issues as you move forward. As part of this then is United Way Worldwide's framework. Just to take a second around this, because this is the general framework, as you know, that United Way Worldwide has identified to kind of help drive your action, which starts with engaging the community and setting a vision, and then developing strategies and focus action, mobilize resources, align and execute the plan, measure, evaluate, and communicate and readjust. As you can see through there, it's all very important that we have data at every step of the way in this process as we move forward. And so that's why it is so critical to begin to look at information as we move forward. But I also want to take a second to talk about what engage the community means. One of the things that I've noted from a number of United Ways and other organizations as they've implemented this is there's been some confusion around what engage the community means. It's not based on an opinion poll. As a United Way, as a funder, we don't have to do an opinion poll to find out, do people care about education, income, or health, or any other issue. It's not about organizing the community to care about our agenda or your agenda. What it's about, and when we talk about engaging the community, it means identifying the individuals that already care about your agenda and mobilizing their action. So find the people in the community that already care about education, that already care about income, that already care about health, or any of those other subsets that you're working on in your local community, and find ways to get them involved, because it takes their engagement to be successful. And again, I will talk more about that on the webinar on December 13th about how to do that. But I just wanted to be clear that you don't have to go make sure that the community agrees with your agenda. You don't have to force the community to care about your agenda. It's really much, I don't want to say easier, but it's really about finding the people that care and getting them involved as you move forward. There's also a key difference between community-wide data versus agency outcomes. And this is again where I've seen some confusion over the years, because the community-wide outcomes and indicators, those issues that you pick at the community-wide level, whether that's graduation rate, income levels, health indicators, whatever that may be, those indicators are collected from community-wide data, not agency data. You cannot just roll up individual agency program data into community-wide indicators, because they are two different things. Community-wide data and indicators comes from community-wide sources like school districts, like the census, like health departments. Community data or agency data is also very important, but you need to be clear that individual agencies should not and cannot be held accountable for changes in the overall community-wide result, because it takes so much action and so many activities to drive the needle at the community level. But individual agencies can contribute and do contribute to those results. They just cannot be held accountable for them. And individual agencies, programs, services, strategies can and must be held accountable for their results. So again, you need data and information so you can hold individual agencies, programs, services accountable for what they said they were going to do as part of your overall overarching strategies to achieve community-wide impact. Let's now drill down to a few more of the definitions. The next one is outputs. And outputs measure the magnitude of the activity of a program, service, or strategy. It really talks about the productivity. So it measures the number of people served, the number of hours of service provided, the amount of resources provided, the location where people are receiving those services, where they live, their zip code, all of those kinds of things. Really just tell us about the productivity of an agency. Don't tell us anything about the quality or the impact of the service, but you do need to know how productive agencies are, whether it's an agency that's going to serve 10 people or 100 people, whether they're going to provide 1 hour of counseling to each person or 20 hours of counseling. You need to know those things so that you can make informed funding decisions. Example outputs are number of youth participating in the after-school program, hours of counseling provided, or amount of emergency assistance provided during the year. So again, these things measure just the productivity of what is being accomplished. The next definition is outcomes. And outcomes are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances for individuals or populations as a direct result of participating in an agency's program or strategy, or a strategy that you're implementing. So the key to outcomes is that it's changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances. One or more of those four need to be accomplished for it to be an outcome. And that is what you want to track, is the number of people that do achieve those results. So again, sample outcomes with youth in the program with improved academic performance, or individuals in the program will maintain employment for 6 months. So that's samples of outcomes. And indicators is a measure which helps quantify an output or outcome. So indicators are definable, quantifiable, measurable, and collectible. Outcomes in of themselves are not measurable. You utilize the indicators to figure out how you're going to measure whether there are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstance. The indicator tells you is a way of measuring that, and I'll give you some examples of that as we move through. But sample indicators are the number of youth in the program, the number of hours of counseling provided, or the number percent of program participants who will remain employed for 6 months. So the indicators tell us how we're going to be able to track whether we have achieved outputs or outcomes. Targets are the goals set for each program or service as outputs or outcomes, and targets may be set by an individual agency, by a program, or set by a funder, such as the United Way, or collectively negotiated with each of your agencies. So there is agreement as to what is each agency's program or target, because again, as Elizabeth Shore said, we need to be willing to be held accountable, and the targets are how we begin to be held accountable for the work that we're accomplishing. So sample targets are 1,245 youth will participate in the after-school program, 4,500 hours of counseling will be provided during the school year, or 80% of program participants will remain employed for 6 months. So the benchmark then, or the measurement, becomes around how is the organization or your strategy doing at achieving these targets that you have set, either individually or hopefully collectively as you move forward. And then finally, a strategy. A strategy is a specific activity program or a set of activities or programs that are linked together to achieve a common purpose. To achieve community-level results, we need to employ a variety of strategies, including programs, community resident action, both service and care, advocacy, media work, etc. So you need to have the ability to track and collect data at the strategy and the program level as we move forward. And some samples of strategies around early education are, if we wanted to, again, make sure that more kids came to school ready to learn and succeed, we know it will take improving the quality of early care and educational experiences, promoting early literacy, neighborhood book drives, supporting parent and teacher education, improving nutrition and oral health education, enhancing community awareness, public policy, etc. So again, this is a sample of all of the kind of strategies that need to come together if we are going to effectively impact the community indicator or the community goal that we've set for ourselves in a community. So one of the next things I want to talk about is how to help your grantees, your funded agencies, your strategies, help them collect data that is relevant to outcomes-based reporting. How do we begin to collect the data that's necessary to drive our agenda and our strategies? And for me, there are really, the best way to think about it is there are three critical questions for effective outcome-based reporting. The first one is, as an agency or a program strategy, how productive are we? Second one is, are we doing things right? And the third one is, are we doing the right things? And these answers become the basis for outcome-based reporting. So one of the ways to think about it is this chart where we have a quadrants of quantity and quality, effect, and effort. And in the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, that's where it answers the question is how productive. That's about quantity and effort, or productivity. And that's where we measure the number of clients served, the number of activities, the number of units of service. So it's important that an agency, a grantee, have the ability to measure the number of people served, the number of activities that occur. so that they can measure their quantity and effort or how productive. The second one is quality. Are we doing things right? This is when we begin to look at are we following our protocols? Client satisfaction and retention data are all three key things to be able to measure so that we can look at quality and effort and answer the question, are we doing things right? So again, client satisfaction, making sure that people are satisfied, asking people how best to be served, so making sure that there is good client satisfaction. And part of the reason for that is because of retention. Because you could have the best program in the world that gets great outcomes for a few people, but if the majority of people don't stay in the program long enough, they're not going to get the benefit of a high quality program. So that's why retention data is so important. This is particularly important, I found, in my experience with many of the youth development, youth serving agencies, whether that be a scouting program or a mentoring program. The fact is, if people are in a program if the youth are in the program for a long time, they will get some good benefits because they're good programming. We know mentoring makes a difference. But if the kids are turning over all the time and they're not in the program long enough, it doesn't matter how good the program is, they're not going to get any benefit from it. So one of the things that I've really stressed with agencies is you have to be very clear about tracking your retention data so you do know how long people are in your program. The other key is following protocols. If you have something that's working, you want to make sure you know how you're doing it and how you're collecting information so you can respond with the appropriate protocols, the appropriate processes, procedures that the agency is following. But again, are we doing the things right does not answer the last question, which is, are we doing the right things? Because ultimately the goal is not just to serve a lot of people, not to just have a lot of client satisfaction and follow our protocols. The goal is to change skills, knowledge, attitudes, opinion, behavior, or circumstances. So ultimately the goal is identifying strategies, programs that are doing the right things to get change. Just to give you a quick example of that, when I was working in Tucson, we had an agency that wanted to, as part of their early education strategy, their early literacy strategy, they wanted to distribute bookmarks to kids in low-income neighborhoods in our community. And they had a great strategy for that. People loved the bookmarks. They thought it was going to be a great idea. They had great protocols to hand out the bookmarks. The problem is there's no evidence, no research that indicates that that's a good strategy to teach kids reading. So while they were doing things right, they were not doing the right things. We need to focus on different strategies to really improve reading as they go forward. So again, are we doing things right? Effect and quantity, you're measuring the number of people that change their skills, knowledge, attitude, opinion, behaviors, or circumstances. And then finally, quality and effect is where we add the percents to that. Did 80%, did 20% make a change as they move forward? So that's why it's important to look at both numbers and percent, because if you only have 20% that are getting better, that tells you either you're dealing with a very tough population, and that's okay, or it may tell you that you need to change some of your protocols, you need to have more data, you need to be more flexible to deal with a complex world to get the kind of results that you need. If you're getting 80 or 90% success, that tells you that you're probably doing it right, so you want to make sure that you've documented those protocols so that you can follow those protocols effectively as you move forward. So for me, this has been a helpful graph, and it was kind of modified from some work of a couple friends of mine, including Mark Friedman, that's helped do this, but it's a good way to really focus on the questions. The other way to think about it is for your agencies. Where do you start? Where do they start? If you're sitting down with an agency and talking to them about how can they get better outcome data, how can they become a learning organization if they're not effectively doing that? Because again, our goal is not just to have agencies give outcome data to us, just as a funder. The goal is really to help agencies become learning communities, learning organizations, so that they can use data and information effectively to drive their work and report to a funder. So effective outcome-based reporting starts with a couple things from my perspective. The first one is they need to start with their mission. What is their organization's mission? What is their goal? Being very clear with their board of directors. What is the work that they are supposed to do in the community? As funders, we've all seen organizations get into mission creep, for example, by trying to follow the money. So I think it's very important for when sitting down with an agency is be very clear about what is your expertise, what is your sweet spot, what does your board believe your role in the community is, so that is very clear. So that would be the first effort is really focusing to make sure that the agency is clear about their mission and their board has adopted that mission. The second one then is to begin to look at as a funder, your community-wide impact statement and their agency's role. If it's around education, income, or health, whatever your outcome goal is, or your community-wide outcome statement, what is their agency's role within that? Do they have a role to play to address that issue as they move forward, so that there is that connection between their mission and the goal? The third one is for them to look at other potential donors or funders' interest, because as one of my adages or principles when I was at a United Way is I never wanted to fund anything that I could kill. And what I mean by that is I never wanted to fund anything that our money was the sole source or the primary source of funding for the program. So if our money went away, the program would go away. So agencies ought to be clear as they begin to look at a strategy or one of their programs. Is there other potential donor interest beyond just the United Way? Because we want to have it really owned by the community as we move forward. And then the fourth one is to ask an agency to, I found that it was really helpful to begin by asking an agency to identify the components of their strategies or their services that they believe makes their work unique and successful. What are those key things of your agency or your program that you think are unique, that make you better than the agency down the street or the 3 agencies down the street? Not to be competitive, but agencies get excited when you ask them what are your unique pieces? What makes your agency unique or different? So I found it's helpful to start there and then ask them to begin to develop data to track whether that uniqueness is really making a difference or not. Just to give you a quick example, when I was with the United Way of Central Indiana in Indianapolis, I was working with an agency which was an child care agency that did infant care, and I was asking them about their outcome tracking, and they said, well, we don't track any outcomes because we're just watching infants. They're just in cribs all day. So what are we going to measure, whether they turn over in 6 months or 3 months? And I said, no, not necessarily, but what are those components of your program, your infant care program, that you think makes you unique compared to others in our community? And she said, well, one of the things we do is that for all the kids in the program, we administer the Denver test, which is a test of early developmental delays. And if we find that the agency or the family or that child appears they may have some potential developmental delays, we then give the family additional information and ask them to go get additional testing and see a professional. So I said, great, that's a unique piece of your program. That sounds pretty exciting. Do you ever track whether the families follow up and get additional testing or additional consultation? And they said, no, we've never thought of tracking that. And I said, well, I think you need to track that because you need to know if that strategy of that uniqueness of your program is actually working. So if you need to follow up to see whether those families do get the additional support. So if you find that 80% of them are actually following up and getting that additional assistance, that tells you're probably doing it right. So you want to make sure you document your protocol so when you have new staff, they continue to do it the same way. And then you can begin to fine-tune it to see how you can move it to 80, 90, 100%. On the other hand, if you find that only 20% of the families are actually following up for additional testing or consultation, that tells you're probably not doing it very well or not effectively. You haven't identified all the key barriers that you have to help them overcome so that they can get the additional testing or results. So that's just a quick example of how that agency was then able to use outcomes tracking in a meaningful way to improve their program and track their results that they could report to the United Way and other funders, as well as document their uniqueness and become a learning organization. So let me again stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. And if anybody has another story about how they've worked with an agency to help them focus on their outcomes, I would love to have them share it with others on the call.
Dan, this is Elizabeth Gehring from Western Connecticut.
Yes.
You might be covering this either later or maybe in another seminar, but do you or did you use logic models, and if so, what, or of some sort or other? How did you have people report indicators and all of that, the outputs and the outcomes and all of that sort of stuff?
Okay.
Did you use logic or some other mechanism?
That's a great question. For the most part, I actually, because of the concept of complex versus complicated problems, I don't believe in rigid logic models, because logic models kind of reinforce that it's a complicated problem versus a complex problem. Because logic.
If you do that, this is going to happen, and this should be the result, and if not, it's because you screwed up someplace.
Yeah, rather than you need to be a learning community. But at the same time, and that's why I like the definitions, and so that you actually negotiate with your funder or with your agencies around how do we fill in those definitions. And I'm actually going to show you an example of that in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Also, somebody asked the question about the best place for data, baseline data for income. Probably the best data, depending on what you're tracking for income data, is the Census Bureau, if you're in a large enough community that does the American Community Survey. At this point, that's kind of the best data. That's the data that United Way Worldwide uses to look at how a community's income is changing, is the American Community Survey. If not, certainly if you have a university or a Department of Commerce at your state level, you could talk to them about other data sources that they're collecting. Certainly looking at unemployment rates and some of those other kinds of things would also be good proxies for income data. Okay, to kind of now give you an example and just kind of walk through about how do we begin to use data to do this effectively. Data, again, 3 levels: community level data, strategy level data, and program level data. And you need to be able to collect information at all 3 levels. At the community level data, again, looking at what are those North Stars that you're setting for the work that you're going to do. At the strategy level data is where potentially you pull together like programs, like services into a congruent group so you can tell that story, and I will give you an example of that in a minute. And then at the program level, having each of the organizations, each of your activities that you're doing, finding a way to measure whether they're making a difference as they move forward. And so to move forward, and I'm going to give an example from what we were doing in Tucson. And I will be utilizing graphs and charts and forms from CTK's online system, just so you can see how you can begin to do those kinds of things with technology. So as we start the community-wide impact strategy, the issue we were working on was education, which is helping children and youth achieve their potential. That was our North Star. That was our community-wide issue. One of our indicators that we were utilizing was high school graduation rates, so that we got that information from the school districts, from the county school district, so we could track how high school graduation rates were changing. Our strategy program outputs were the number of youth served and the units of service provided. So we were tracking both for the outputs, the number of youth provided and the units of service provided, and the units of service were after school days. Our outcome for both at the strategy level and at the program level, the outcome was youth developing skills, competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepared them for college, work, and life. So the after-school program that we were doing was based on a skill development after-school program and not just a recreational program, if you will. And our indicator that we identified at both the program level and the strategy level was that we got all of the agencies that we were funding for after-school programming to all agree to use the same pre and post skills test. So again, the individual agencies were using the skill test, pre and post test, and then the At the strategy level, we actually were able to bring together then those agencies. And this is my example, the 5 agencies that were doing the after school program, we were able to pull them together into into the strategy level because we had comparable data from the 5 agencies. And our strategy targets were during the year, this was last year, that collectively these 5 agencies were going to serve 4,428 youth, that they were going to provide 10,000 units of service after school days, and 60% of the youth participants would score higher on their post-skill test. So again, we had our goals set, we had our accountability set, and we had the strategies. So just to show you, again, set the stage, first of all, we were looking at the community-wide data, which again, collected from the school districts. So we could, over time, look at how the graduation rates were changing over time. Again, understanding that no one strategy, no one individual, or no one program was responsible for driving or changing these goals, but that collectively all of the activities we were doing, because we weren't just doing after-school programming, we were doing a whole host of other things as well as we move forward. So this set the stage for putting the context of the work we were doing based on the data from the school district. At the strategy level and the program level, again, which is collected from the agencies, partners, neighborhoods. In this case, here was a quarterly reporting form that we designed so that the agencies could report their results to us in a quarterly basis. So here was the form. At the top, again, just highlighting the program and what the contact person. And then the second part of that, tracking the outputs. So again, this agency, which was called Brighter Tomorrows in this example, they said that they would serve, and we negotiated with the agencies actually these goals each year. Collectively, we negotiated them. So this agency said they were going to serve 3,000 kids during the year. So that was their accountability. And during the last quarter, this is the 4th quarter, they served 589 kids for a total for the year of 2,595. So again, looking at that accountability, they said they would provide 4,500 after-school days or units of service. They provided 947 this quarter for a total of 4,619 for the year. So as you can see, they actually exceeded the number of after-school days, but they fell a bit short relative to the number of youth that they said they would serve. And then the outcome, youth developing skills, competencies in an out-of-school time program, and the indicator, the pre and post test. So this agency said of the kids they're going to serve, 1,000 would do better on their post test. And during this quarter, 185 did better, and 900 for the year, 967 kids did better. So now how do we begin to pull that information together to use it strategically to make decisions and drive our results? So here's a sample of a report that's highlighting each agency's quarterly results relative to the outputs, the number of youth to be served, and the units of service. So as you can see, Brighter Tomorrows, they said that they would serve 3,000 kids. This is how many new youth they served each quarter. For the 4 quarters, you can look at that as a percentage, because again, unless it's a special summer program, they ought to be at about 25% each quarter. So this can very quickly tell you who's ahead of the curve and who's below the curve relative to their productivity, if you will. You can also, using a system like this, look at it graphically, because the graph sometimes, again, a picture can tell a better story. So you can see that Brighter Tomorrows, again, remember, while they're at 15%, they are the largest agency, serving the largest number of kids. So this is, again, looking at the productivity piece, allowing us to track that. Could also track it collectively to see how the agencies are collectively dealing. So again, while a couple of them were below in the number of served, a couple were above, collectively they all were about on target each quarter, as you can see, so that strategically at the strategy level, you can look at those results. The next one is total served. We can begin to very quickly look. Remember, our accountability piece was that collectively the agencies said they were going to serve 4,428 during the year. And during the year, they actually exceeded that goal and served 4,738. So you have information that you can utilize then to go to your community, go to your donors, go to your board and say, thank you, because of your support, we were able to exceed our goal in the number of youth served in a quality after-school program, Conversely, if you found that those numbers were not hitting the goals, you could work with the agencies collectively or individually to see what they could do to increase their outreach so they could achieve those goals. Because the use of data is both to kind of help fine-tune things that aren't working, as well as utilize that as an opportunity to highlight what's working so that you can build on that as you move forward. Client demographics, if that's important for you to track client demographics so you can identify, are you serving those most in need? Are you serving kids that you want to serve? You can collect very easily from your agencies at the strategy and the agency level the number of people served and their ethnic breakdown if you want that, their income level, their gender, whatever that may be, or their age. So here's just a sample of race and ethnicity, being able to quickly look at that and snapshot that as you go forward. Now let's move on to the are we doing the right things, tracking the outcomes for each quarter. So again, as you remember, Brighter Tomorrows said that 1,000 kids would do better on their post-test, and here it is each quarter, exactly how many kids did better and their percent. So again, you can track this on an individual agency level and at the strategy level collectively to see how each agency is doing each quarter so that you can make those mid-course corrections. If you find an agency that is not doing well, not many of the kids are learning new skills, then you may want to talk to them. You might want to bring them together with the agencies that are doing it well to see if there's some learnings that can occur as we begin to do this. And conversely, I think, again, the real power of this is that you have real-time data during the year so that you can go to an agency or go to a donor and say, look, we've got this program, it's working well, kids are learning new skills. If you'd be willing to make an additional gift, or if we can write a grant, we could actually get more resources in the middle of the year to address this issue because of the fact that you have real-time data. So that's what we were able to do in Tucson, is actually go to a donor with this kind of information and get them to significantly increase their gift, or give them to give a new gift, or we could use it to write a grant because we had real-time data. Again, either at each quarter or at the end of the year, like this report, we can now very quickly see that, again, Brighter Tomorrows said 1,000 kids would do better on their post-test, and 967 did better, so they were down 3%. That's probably within the margin of error. But the other agency, Leaders of Tomorrow, as you can see, was actually down 18%. So we may want to have some conversations with that agency about what they're doing, how we can improve what they're doing, maybe bring them together with some of the other agencies so that are successful, the other three agencies, so that we can build that success as we move forward. And you can also dashboard. Again, using technology, you could dashboard that to go put it on your website, email it back and forth, however you want to use that. But here, again, example of our goal was 2,670 kids to do better on their post-test, and the agencies collectively exceeded that goal so that we can, in fact, tell the story to the donors, to your community, to potential funders of the success of your effort. So that's just a sample, an example based on the work we did in Tucson, how you can use data every quarter to help make mid-course corrections, to help work with your agencies as you move forward. Before we move forward, just to identify how many of the organizations are already using technology to do these kinds of things. So if you would just take a second to vote on whether you're now using technology to do this work. All right. And as you can see, I'm glad to see the majority of you are using technology, and a few aren't. But that's great to understand that. So let me just talk now a little bit more about the use of technology as we go forward. So the power of technology. To make the necessary mid-course corrections, you need timely information. That's kind of what we've been talking about. And technology can facilitate the collection of that information. It can facilitate your grant-making process and all of those kinds of things, so that you can focus on building the number of strategies that you have to build to be effective. Also enables you to enhance your communication between your agencies and partners, and improves your ability to get results and tell your story to donors and funders. with technology, for example, agencies can submit their data on a more regular basis, whether that's monthly, quarterly, semi-annually. Again, I think most of you understand that waiting a year is too long to find out an agency didn't do what they said they were going to do. So it's important to have that timely information. Technology helps us do that. And the information is submitted in a unified format to facilitate that effective analysis and bringing that together at the strategy level, because you can roll it up at the strategy level when you have technology in a much more easier way. If you are just getting individual spreadsheets from agencies, it's very hard to roll that up, and it takes you a lot of time to do that. And that's why, from my experience, without technology, agencies didn't see their information used, so they weren't very excited about submitting a year-end report or a report, because in most cases, if we got individual paper reports, all we ended up doing with them is look for a couple exceptions. If not, they just got put in their file drawer, their file folder at the United Way, and the agencies never saw that information getting used. In Tucson, the kind of that dashboard that I showed you, we actually created that, updated that every quarter. We emailed it to the agencies, we put it on our website, we told the story so that agencies saw that their information was being used real time. And that really encouraged them to submit the data because they saw it was being effectively used. So that's one of the other reasons that technology can really help you do that. Other kind of lessons learned around it is that when you're collecting the data you're going to collect, the data you're going to display, it's important that kind of a couple things. One, that it have communication power, that will funders and donors understand the data. If you're collecting things that people don't understand, it makes it hard to tell your story. That's why graduation rates is such a strong data indicator, because it has huge communication power. Everybody understands what graduation rates mean, what those kinds of issues mean. People get confused when you talk about the so-and-so scores on XYZ test. People don't know whether a 500 is better than an 800 or 600 or 400. So those kinds of test results don't have a strong communication power. The second thing is you need to make sure that all your data relates to your community-wide impact strategy. Can people clearly see the connection between the data you're collecting and what you're trying to achieve in your community? The third one is you do not need to report or collect everything. It's one of the things to tell agencies. They may be collecting 10 data points to make a difference in with their work, but they don't need to report everything to you, because data travels in herds. Typically, if 2 or 3 things are going one way, they're all going to be going that way. So you just need to work with your agencies, with your partners, to identify those key data elements that are the leads of the herd, the lead horse, if you will, to collect that, because the other things will be following behind it. And finally, making sure that any data you collect is easily collectible and replicable, because you don't want to have something that's too hard to do, too expensive to do, that it becomes a barrier so you cannot collect it over time or on a regular basis. So again, looking to make sure it tells a strong story, it relates. You just have to find a few key things to track and dashboard, and is it things that are easily collectible and replicable. Was this webinar helpful for folks?
Absolutely. At least from my perspective, it was.
All right. Well, as I wanted to remind you, my next webinar is on December 13th from 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Central Standard Time. And it's about effective community engagement, how to unlock a community's resources for greater impact. So it's really about how do we develop the whole wide range of strategies that's necessary to drive a community agenda. So with that, again, thank you very much on behalf of CTK. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving and are moving into a great holiday December as we move forward. And thank you very much for taking time to join the webinar today. And if you have any questions or comments or just want to talk about it in a little more detail, please feel free to contact me. Again, you will have all of my contact information as well. So thank you all very much, and have a great remainder of your week.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.